This episode of Inside the Goblin Universe brought to you by Goblin Media. We bring the rabbit hole to you.
This is Stan Gordon, and you're listening to Inside the Goblin Universe.
Welcome, little goblins, into another edition of Inside the Goblin Universe. Now, tonight, we're very lucky to have on with us none other than the legend, Mr. Stan Gordon. And it's interesting that I now have my own radio show here, co-hosted with Bryan Bowden, because I first was introduced to this man, Mr. Gordon, back whenever I was in elementary school, over the radio. A local radio station out of Pittsburgh, KDKA, would often have Mr. Gordon on as a guest, and I would listen there around the radio in wide-eyed wonder about the stories that he would spin concerning UFOs and Bigfoot and other things around my neck of the woods. So without further ado, let us welcome Mr. Stan Gordon. Thank you very much for coming to Inside the Goblin Universe, my friend.
Well, Ron, thanks for having me on your program. We appreciate it.
Well, I'll tell you what, Bryan and I have been looking forward to this for quite some time. And then, as I've said, I think there's something to radio. I know a lot of people don't listen to radio anymore, but there's something about, listening to just the evocation of a voice, taking you someplace. And that's the way I grew up with my family. We listened to the radio all the time, but we were also lucky to have a very good radio networks in our area as well. And now that Bryan and I are doing this, online, as podcast, I think that a lot of people do follow this and they want to hear what you have to say. And we're very lucky to have you on the month of October because, this, of course, is my favorite month. But, whenever I first listened to you, it was concerning Kecksburg. So, as we talked to Steve Alton at the first guest at the very beginning of the month, he talked about UFO activity, such things as getting alien technology and forming our own technology out of it. So let's just go right into the whole Kecksburg incident. Tell us about your take on it. And you actually got started with the Kecksburg incident by listening to the radio, correct?
Yeah, actually, my interest began before that. That was 1965. I was 16 years old when that happened. But actually, my interest started in 1959 when I was 10 years old. And how that came about is, October is my favorite month, too, because that's when my birthday is during the Halloween season. And it was because of that on my 10th birthday, my parents gave me an AM radio as a birthday gift because I was a radio guy. I loved to listen to radio. And I was tuning around the radio that night because of Halloween. There were some radio shows talking about haunted houses and strange happenings and flying saucers. And I was a curious 10-year-old, and I wanted to know, are these people making these stories up? Are they telling the truth? So I began to make a lot of trips to the Greensburg Library and started reading all the books they had on the subject. So that's how it really began for me. So I had already been interested in the subject when 1965 comes around. And yes, you're right. December 9th, Thursday night, I'm tuned in to KDK Radio in Pittsburgh because they had a well-known radio talk show. It was called Contact, and the host of the show was the late Mike Levine. And he had a special guest on that night that you'll probably recognize. His name was Frank Edwards, who had written some books on unusual happenings. So I wanted to listen to the radio show to see what Frank Edwards had to say. Well, coincidentally, almost the entire radio show was now focusing on this breaking news story and the many reports that the station is getting of this brilliant fireball that was seen from Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania late that afternoon. And that object, whatever it was, apparently came in over a greater Pittsburgh area. It was seen by multitudes of people about 4:47 p.m., just as it was getting dark. And many people around the area saw it. Some people thought it was an aircraft that was on fire. And it was a very intriguing night. I was running back and forth between the old black and white console TV and the radio trying to get the latest reports. And as the evening went on, it's covering more and more of the news all across the Pittsburgh area. And even the late Bill Burns on KDK TV was breaking in reports. It was very fascinating that the object, whatever it was, apparently fell into a wooded ravine near Kecksburg, PA. So it's about 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh in Westmoreland County. But what he was breaking in was the fact that the military was now arriving in that small farming community to search for an unidentified flying object. And so it was a fascinating night, and that's how it began for me, really getting out into the field. And I was documenting the information as it was coming across the news that night. And the next day, as I go out to the newsstand to pick up all the local papers, lo and behold, it's the headlines all around the area. It's making national news. And I began to try to make some phone calls to try to track down some of the witnesses, but there were very few names in the paper. But it was over a period of weeks and months and years, especially during the 1980s when I was accumulating a lot of new information on Kecksburg. And a lot of it was coming from relatives and friends and neighbors of people who were involved. Some were anonymous tips. But I can just say that now after over 52 years, almost 52 years of research, that I've interviewed hundreds of people who have given me a great amount of information on the case. There's still many unanswered questions, but there's no doubt whatsoever that an object of still unknown origin, undetermined origin, fell from the sky and was apparently recovered by the military. We can talk for days and days about the details of the case. It is an amazing story, regardless of what this thing was.
Right. Now, of course, one of the current theories is that it was a satellite, a GE satellite or something of that nature, falling randomly into the Earth. Now, with that kind of proposition out there, what is the evidence that you have to point out that this was not something that was just falling to Earth?
Well, first of all, there are many, many, many theories. I brought a lot of these theories years ago. I mean, the theories go back actually to a family I interviewed who was interviewed by an Air Force officer out of Kecksburg, and he told the family, I mean, right at that time period, that it was a Gemini capsule that had fallen in the area, which, of course, we know that was not the case. Of course, the official explanation from the government was a meteor, that it was a bright meteor in the sky, that nothing fell to the ground. One of the most popular theories for years was Cosmos 96, which was a Soviet Venus probe that had a technical malfunction and coincidentally re-entered the Earth's atmosphere at 3:18 a.m. the same day when this happened about 4:47 p.m. So for a lot of years, we were interested in that more and more to try to see if there could be any association. Without getting to all the information, all the technical information, in more recent years, there's been a lot of new data on that, and that's pretty much been eliminated. The theories go on and on and on. Another guy told me there was a projectile fired from a giant gun from a railroad car in Canada. Another guy told me he was certain it was a Soviet ICBM went out of control. And then, of course, a lot of people were really interested in the Gluck, that it was the Nazi bell, even though I've seen no evidence the two related, nor have I seen any evidence that the Nazi bell became a reality, even though it appears that the Nazis were working on that and other secret programs, but I've never seen any evidence that it actually became a working project. And then in more recent years, you've got the GE Mark II reentry vehicle. You had another theory came out a few weeks ago that it was connected to one of the film canisters that was connected to our very secretive spy satellite program during that time period. There's a lot of good theories out there, but we need to see the evidence. And because something is similar looking, that doesn't mean that's what it is. Because whatever this object was, many, many people tell us how this thing was moving relatively slowly. We know it was making definite changes along its path, even before it fell. I mean, for example, from Greensburg, as it moved over Greensburg, goes out roughly Route 30 east, makes the turn to the south. It's seen by people all along that area from, like, Marguerite down through Norvelt, past Kecksburg, out to the mountains of Laurelville, where it kind of hesitates and it goes back from the mountain, goes back towards Kecksburg, makes another turn, and drops down slowly into the woods. The people who saw it go down that afternoon said it did not drop down at a high rate of speed. For example, if you had a reentry of space debris or a meteor coming down, and there's no doubt it did go through, went into the wooded ravine, it knocked trees over, but the object itself was pretty much fully intact.
One of the things I was interested in about this whole entire, when I heard about Kecksburg the first time, was the hieroglyphics on this object, supposed hieroglyphics on this object. And then they started correlating with some of the hieroglyphics that was being reported previously with Roswell. And do you see any correlations in your research to the crafts that crashed over in Roswell, the recovery of that object, which seemed more like a disc, versus Kecksburg, which seems more like, for lack of a better term, an acorn.
Yeah, well, what the witnesses saw, I mean, what we found out that we didn't know at the time it happened, because people kept their mouth shut for years. I mean, officially, the next day when the government said nothing fell, and it was just a meteor in the sky, well, the witnesses, they told some relatives, they told some friends, but most of the time, they basically kept their mouth shut because they knew what they saw. Because what happened was, after it fell, some of the locals went down into the woods, and they come across this large metallic acorn-shaped object semi-buried in the ground. So this thing's big enough for a human to stand inside of. It's one solid piece of metal, kind of an off-gold bronze color, estimated somewhere 10 to 12 feet or more in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter. It's one solid body. There's no weld marks, no seams, no rivets, no wings, no fuselage, no windows they can see. But on the raised-up back part of like what you would see on an acorn, some witnesses, and there were some who were only a few feet away from it, said there were raised-up markings that looked more like symbols than writing. And luckily, one of the witnesses, because of his family background, he was familiar with Cyrillic or Russian. And he said, that is definitely not what it was. He said, this is more like symbols. And he was very curious about it. And unfortunately, this is all from memory because, you know, the firemen are there. They're all looking for a downed aircraft. The locals are there. And it's by memory of what the symbols look like. So we can't be 100% sure of that. But the one witness, for years, he looked into libraries and looking up ancient writings from what he could recall. And he said the closest thing he could recall that looked similar was ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Egyptian, not Sumerian at all?
Well, he mentioned Egyptian. I can go by what he said.
No, because the rumor of the hieroglyphics were similar to that, but more geometric in shape and form, supposedly. But of the people that were able to get to the craft before the military got there, did anybody suffer any type of ill effects from this craft? Like radiation poisoning or sicknesses that maybe we weren't aware of at the time, but... I can't go into detail. I can tell you that at least one person who was very close to it in the years to follow had numerous types of various type of physical ailments that this person always associated with being there. I heard other reports allegedly of other people who got down into the field, told me by relatives of people who are now deceased. So at least one person who supposedly touched the object died at a young age, but there's no way to confirm that. Right.
But I mean, but it wasn't something that was widely reported. No, it was not a widely reported type of thing.
Right. Now, there was also reports, though, of people that were on the scene that witnessed it that may have died under some fairly peculiar situations, too, correct? Like the one reporter, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he die in a car hit him out in California? Is that correct? Well,
but that was several years later. Okay. There is no doubt that who you're talking about is John Murphy. John Murphy was the news director at WHJB Radio in Greensburg. That was the primary news source. And John was the principal reporter. As far as we know, he was the first reporter on the scene. Many came in during that evening. And there's a lot of interesting aspects to it, because I interviewed his wife, the people he worked with at the station, talked to a lot of people who were involved in it, and there were some things that never came out in the news. And one thing I was told, and his wife told me this, and people at the station confirmed it, and I know that this was a fact, that the station and he and his wife were in radio communications. So he had gotten out to the scene, and he had got there on the scene about an hour before the state police fire marshal and another investigator, a small group of people, including a young boy, had seen it go down to the woods with his mom, came. And apparently, from what I was told, that he radioed back that he had gone down into the woods, he had seen the object, and he had taken photographs of it. It was... He had taken photographs of it? He had taken photographs of it. Okay. And he told them it was, again, like an off-gold color, I believe, that was kind of acorn shape, had odd markings on it. And apparently, he had film in his camera, and he had a roll of film, and he had already taken it in his pocket. At some point, we don't know exactly when, some of the authorities at the scene confiscated the film out of his camera, but didn't know he had the other roll. I talked to, I believe it was 2 people over the years that told me they saw the black and white picture. Those pictures have never surfaced. Well, interesting things happened. John Murphy this was a huge news story. It was making national news. He was gathering information, interviewing witnesses, and he was putting together a special radio show called Object in the Woods. And when it was broadcast in a censored fashion. But what we have learned is prior to that broadcast, a number of people at the station were there. I interviewed some of the people who were there at the station. Apparently these government men came in to talk to him. They went to a studio. They were in there for quite a while. And after they left, John came out very upset and told one of the managers that they had confiscated the voice tapes that he had interviewed the people with. And it was after that period of time, he began to slowly back away from the story and pretty much didn't want to discuss it anymore. It was his biggest story. All of his notes, all of his records, all of his pictures vanished. Okay? And, I mean, his wife said he looked all around the house, the stuff wasn't there anymore. We don't know what happened to those pictures. We've heard for years that there are very probably other black and white pictures taken by other people of the military, of the object. None of those pictures have ever surfaced, even though I've interviewed different people who told me they saw the pictures over the last 50 years. Where they are, I have no idea. But years later, several years later, John is on a vacation in California. He's walking across the road late at night, apparently to look over at some oil slicks, and a car comes around the bend and apparently hit him. And I know a lot of people are making a lot out of that part of the story. I've never seen any evidence the two are related, but, you know, who am I to say? I have no way to know. I don't believe it was connected to it, but some people do.
It is a coincidence, and things like this have been happening. Actually, lately, a lot of people investigating UFOs have mysteriously died. Accidents, and let's put that in quotes. But I have this strong desire and feeling that somewhere, someplace in that area, someone's going to come into a house or a home and buy a place that they lived in, and they're going to renovate, and they're going to find a treasure trove of photographs hidden in a wall or a floorboard, and this could blow the doors off of this case.
I truly think that there's probably a family scrapbook somewhere. You know, somebody has them laying around the house, or who knows, they may have been destroyed years ago. We don't know. We've heard all kind of stories, but we've never been able to track down the pictures so far.
Well, that would be your ace in the hole, though. That's your hold card, your fail safe. If something happens to me, release the photos. So they may have made a bargain, or he knows what he had, and I'm sure if you got a couple investigators come into your house after you've been doing interviews and pretty much laid it out, if you talk about it, you're going to die, I'd back away as well, but I would probably find a way to disseminate this in this modern era. But back then,
that's what, and back then, I mean, nobody would think about this. Nobody had cell phone cameras, and the communication back to the station that Mr. Murphy was making wasn't on the spot. It wasn't instantaneous. That's the problem that we're dealing with looking back in time. You know, it would have been interesting to do this in a lot different way, but, you know, the technology wasn't there at the time. But I do have to point out that people coming to your house and questioning you is very common on meteor sites, isn't it? See, that immediately takes you to the next level. There's something so incredibly strange about this. But Stan also has stories, and I'll let Stan tell them because he's much more eloquent in doing this, about when people have witnessed a Bigfoot sighting, and similar things happen too, don't they? I mean, you have one story where, you know, people showed up at the house and saying this is better not, this shouldn't be disseminated.
Well, I don't know exactly what was said like that, but I've had cases over the years, both UFO and Bigfoot cases, which suggested the possibility that a government agency could have been involved in some of those cases, or at least mystery men showed up, let's put it that way. And, especially during that massive 1973 UFO Bigfoot wave in Pennsylvania, which is, still, it's probably the most amazing series of events that had ever been recorded. And that was when I had my first group, the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group. And we had started out here small in the Pittsburgh area in 1970. By 1973, we had expanded to cover the state of Pennsylvania. The group was kind of unique in that all of us in the group, we were all volunteers, but it was mainly scientists and engineers and research people and police officers and former military intelligence people. It was a unique group. But we were doing this around our jobs, and we were responding 24 hours a day. And by 1973, as we expanded across the state, we are surprisingly getting referrals from the state police and from other agencies and we were just being inundated with reports. And then this massive UFO Bigfoot outbreak occurs, and it goes on for weeks and months in 1974, mainly with the Bigfoot stuff. And there were some very, very weird cases that we talk about. I mentioned in my Silent Invasion book. And a lot of sightings out in Derry Township, which I'm sure Ron's very familiar with because I believe you've lived around there over the years. Mm-hmm. And that area is along the Chestnut Ridge, and I'm sure we'll be talking about the Chestnut Ridge. And the Chestnut Ridge, actually, it's a 100-mile long mountain range. It goes from Preston County, West Virginia, to Westmore and Fayette, Indiana County in southwest PA. Probably one of the most unusual, most active areas in the country, repeatedly with weird phenomena, from UFOs to Bigfoot, other cryptid sightings, giant birds, the Thunderbirds, Black Panthers, other weird creatures, underground sounds, mystery booms, mini UFOs, little discs that come up from fly around people's homes. I mean, all kind of weird things going up along the ridge all the time, including in recent weeks. And it goes on year after year. But anyhow, there was a numerous sightings during that time period, numerous events out at one of the big mobile home communities out near Superior in Derry Township. And one of the incidents, I remember we were down with my team down at Hermione, PA that night. The police had called us. They had a Bigfoot incident down there where a guy just cut his lawn, went in to take a shower, came out, and his dog was on a chain outside, going crazy. About 45 feet away, there's a 7-8 foot tall Bigfoot standing there. And we went down there to investigate that case. And while we're there, we get a radio call that the police up in Derry Township wanted our team up there as soon as possible. The police got there before we did and found some tracks near the trailer and kept them for us. And when we got on scene, we found out that people were in the trailer. They heard like scratching on the end of the trailer, like a baby crying sound outside. Their dog was out there, but it was like muffled, like it was afraid to bark. And the power was going on and off in the trailer. So when our team we searched the area and we found that the main electrical supply box had been ripped open, and that thick, heavy electrical supply wire that goes from there to the trailer underground was ripped up out of the ground. And remind me to tell you about the energy connection, too, because that's something we found then and is still ongoing. But anyhow, that was an interesting case.
Now, can I go back to that the trailer part? So the electricity is ripped out of the ground. Now, when you saw the prints there on the ground, were they the bipedal humanoid-looking prints, or do they look different, more canine?
If I remember, they weren't really that clear. You could see some. The ground conditions were good. I believe they were more three-toed. They were pretty common back in those days. Three-toed
back in the. So the reason why I'm saying this is because Pennsylvania is probably one of the greatest states if you want to encounter a Bigfoot or a cryptid. A lot of reports in Pennsylvania up into New York State and Ohio. You'll be surprised. Yeah. I grew up thinking it was the West Coast and there was no Bigfoots here, and I was pleasantly surprised and scared out of my mind at one point on an investigation. But the reason why I asked about the prints is because you have another cryptid in the area, which you know of, is called Dogman, which is a lichen.
Yeah.
And what you're saying and the way that they were scratching outside, mimicking, and ripping out the power, a typical Dogman type of scenario that they just love to terrorize people. Bigfoots in general, unless it's I'm going to say like a rut period or mating period, you don't really get too many reports of them being too aggressive, except if you're in Ohio with the grassman. But what you're saying with the three-toed, I would lay money it wasn't Bigfoot as much as it was Dogman or werewolf, lichen, whatever you want to call this thing. But do you in your research have you gotten any correlations between UFOs sightings and Bigfoots within a certain time period or during the sighting? Because
that's what all ran into. But anyhow, just to tell you a little bit about what you just brought up. Okay.
Yep.
First of all, the Bigfoot phenomena is much more complex than many people realize, or many people want to realize. Throughout the country and many other parts of the world, areas that are commonly reporting Bigfoot sightings where you have your typical five-toed footprints, such as Pacific Northwest, out in Oregon, up in California, up in the Canada, they also report three-toed footprints as well, sometimes even four-toed tracks, which just adds more and more to the complex mystery we're dealing with. what we're talking about more recent years of Dogman or something that has some Bigfoot characteristics, but a little more of a snout. The head's a little more wolf-like or dog-like.
Right.
Sometimes drop down on all fours. Okay. Well, going back to this massive Bigfoot wave went on for weeks and months. A lot of the sightings were your typical Bigfoot, 6 to 9 foot tall, walking upright, long arms, whatever. But there were also some incidents that I write about at the time that maybe would be more similar to Dogman. But could it also be, you got to look at the witness, you got to look at the lighting, you got to look at the distance, the angle. Maybe some of these, a lot of people haven't been that as close to Bigfoot as some other witnesses have. So some of these people might be seeing details that others have not reported, and it's getting confused between the two type of reports. But some of the cases I had in 73 were very much along the line of Dogman, and it's during that same time period we're talking about now with the trailer area out there. But I'll give you another example. This was up in Beach Hills in August, also 73, and this is between the towns of Greensburg and Jeanette. It was a very rural, not very well populated area at the time. This woman was visiting her friends at a home that was a very low foundation to the ground. It was very low. 3 o'clock in the morning, the woman goes into the bathroom. She's sitting there. She hears almost a strange screeching sound outside, and moments later, maybe 2 feet in front of her, right in the window, which is a screen window, is this hideous creature that just stands up and looks directly at her, face to face. It's got the hairy face. Yep. It's got the glowing reddish-orange eyes, the big fang-like teeth, looks more wolf-like. She is in hysterics, runs out of there. They called the state police, and she talked to them, then they connected her to me. The state trooper went out to the scene, found some tracks out there. I went out there the next morning because that woman, she was so scared, she had those people take her to her home several miles away. And then what happened is, and this is something that not very few people know about or have ever heard, but I have more than one instance of it. About an hour later, the same creature or a similar one showed up at her property several miles away. I've had other incidents like that as well.
Yeah, it's atypical of the Dogman cryptid is that for some reason their tracking ability is immense. It's fantastic, and they will track you for hundreds of miles. It's not there's been reports of this creature, people encountering the creature, taking a shot at it, and these creatures track it back to their house 200 miles away, and they go on a rampage. And what I noticed the difference is Bigfoot doesn't want to spend their time ringing doorbells and scratching and trying to scare the hell out of you. For some reason, these types of cryptids love to terrorize people. They know what they are, and that's always the report. It's all terror. Very rarely do you have an encounter where you kind of walk away from it and you're like, okay, but this is great that this thing tracked her back to her own house. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and this is the book called Silent Invasion, which is a must-have. Any person that is into ufology, into cryptids, into the paranormal unexplained, they must have this book. Now, I'm a fellow writer, and I will tell anybody to definitely get these books. If you're thinking about buying my book or Stan's book, definitely get Stan's book because it is a play-by-play over what occurred sequentially in that very strange time period. You have to get it. All my listeners out there right now, run out to the store, go online. We'll give all the details later at the end of the show.
Amazon.com.
Yeah, but it is a must-have. I will tell you this. And like I said, Stan got me going on this. He is the godfather of all things paranormal. So you got to get that. But Stan, there is even more strange things that are going on than the Dogman. But there is this interesting, as you said a little bit earlier, this interesting UFO Bigfoot tie-in where they're seen at the exact same time in the same place. And one particular incident, I think that happened, if I'm not mistaken, in Fayette County. Can we just go over that a little bit before we get into something else here on the Chestnut Ridge?
Yeah, well, I was just going to answer your associate's question here about all that. So all these reports are going on in 1973. And many of the Bigfoot sightings were happening during that time were in daylight. And a lot of the sightings, a lot of them were at close range. So we're talking 5, 10, 15 feet away from people, where they walked out in front of cars, they walked near mobile homes, they were in rural areas. Sometimes there was more than one creature seen together. And a lot of people got a very, very good look at it. In many other locations, there was physical evidence at the scene. So my teams would get there, the police would get there. So this was all being documented as it was happening. And it was making a lot of local news and even national news on our investigation. It was going on for months and months. And I always thought that Bigfoot was very likely an unknown type of primate, some type of unknown animal.
Yeah.
Well, then all these events are coming to our attention, and like you said, the time period, there was no cell phones, there was no internet, there wasn't a lot of TV shows about the subject, not in great detail about Bigfoot in particular, but anyhow, we began to notice some very strange things. For example, one of the first things we noticed was our teams would go out to a location, there'd be a series of footprints that would just suddenly stop and disappear when there should have been more tracks. Even in fresh snow, and even in recent years, we're getting reports in deep, heavy snow where there's a long trail of tracks, no other tracks in the area, and they suddenly just stop and disappear. That just wasn't making any sense. And then we saw the pattern where we were getting all these reports. We'd have a UFO sighting in a certain area, then within minutes, hours, to days later, we'd have a Bigfoot sighting, or vice versa. And then things got much more intriguing. That's when we had some very interesting reports with Bigfoot and UFOs seen together at the same time and place. And then we were really scratching our heads like, what's going on out here? A couple of the examples, and you brought up one case, and we'll mention that. One case was very interesting was September 27th, north of Pittsburgh, up around Beaver County. There was 2 women out in the country waiting for a friend to pick them up. They see this huge Bigfoot creature with white hair, and I talk about these because a lot of people have never heard that there were grayish or white-haired Bigfoot, but you do get some reports on them. And they're watching this huge hairy thing running across the road towards the woods, but in one of its hands, it has a glowing ball of light that it's carrying.
Whoa.
And a short time later, this object comes across the sky and projects a beam of light down into the woods where the creature ran into. That's just an example of some of the reports we are getting. So then this amazing case unfolds. October 25th, 1973. I was receiving many UFO reports on my hotline. My hotline's been open since 1969. It's never stopped ringing. It rings all the time, even today. And so all these reports are coming in October 25th of 73. 10:30 that night, I get a call from a state trooper from the Uniontown Barracks up in Fayette County again, along the Ridge area, not far from the Ridge. He was a little upset from what his voice was, and he said, you need to get your team up here as soon as possible. I think there's a good chance of something still up in the pasture. So what I found out was, and we could talk for hours and hours about this case alone, so I'll give you the basics of it. I wrote the whole thing up in the Silent Invasion book, one of the weirdest cases ever documented. So 9 o'clock that night, about 15 people live in the farming area out there in the country. They observed this barn-sized, round, bright red ball. And it's about 100 feet off the ground, and it's slowly moving down towards the ground. And the story would focus on the farmer's son. He was a big guy. He and his wife were riding down the farm road to go out to visit his dad at his farm, at his dad's farm. He sees the object. They see the object. They see people outside. They see people on the porch all watching this thing. So he decides he's going to go up over on a different hill to get a better view. And he's watching this thing, and he and two young boys, as they're watching, decide, you know what, let's go up and take a look and see what this thing is. So they move over into the truck. They go over to his dad's farm, and they pick up a handful of ammunition. The son does, 30-06. He grabs a 30-06 handful of ammunition. In that handful of ammunition, there were 2 tracers. So anybody out there at hunts know when you fire that tracer, you just get that luminous trail so you can see where the projectile is going towards. Anyhow, as they're riding down the farm road The dogs in the area are going crazy. They hear in the distance like loud baby crying sounds, and they hear a high-pitched whining noise. As they get closer and closer to that area they're going to, it's getting louder and louder. They angle their truck, leave the headlights on so they can see their path, and they comment that it looks like something's draining the power from the headlights. I never saw that before, which, of course, not uncommon historically when there's a close UFO at hand. Sometimes there's EMF effects. And as they make their way up to the top of the pasture, they're standing there in amazement. About 250 feet away, this object is on the ground right above it. But now it's not a complete sphere. It's like a big white hemisphere, like a big white dome, maybe about 100 feet or so in diameter. It's huge. It's luminous. It's glowing. The whole area is luminous, making a high-pitched whining noise. They're standing there in amazement. They can't believe it. One kid's getting pretty shook up. And then they notice about 75 feet away, along the barbed wire fence, are these two tall figures walking in their direction. So the fence post is 6 feet tall. The one in front is 8 feet tall. The one behind is about 7 feet tall. Their first thought was they got to be bear. What else could they be? But they realized that we know what bear look like. These are not bear. I mean, they're your typical Bigfoot. Bipedal, walking upright, kind of a little bit stooped, walking one behind the other. The arms are so long they're hanging down almost to the ground. Hair's hanging off the arms and off the body. No neck. The eyes are about the size of 50-cent piece and they're luminous and glowing bright green. They're making this baby crying sound. And they're all getting pretty unnerved. Well, the one kid's so scared he runs out of the field. The other kid yells, shoot him, shoot him. Well, the guy finally takes his first shot, which turned out to be a tracer. So he just had that luminous trail.
Right.
He fires that second tracer, and when he does, the largest of the two creatures, the one in front, makes this loud baby crying whining noise, reaches out as though to grab that tracer, and the moment it does that, that huge object in the field disappears. It doesn't take off, it just vanishes, it's gone. So now most of the luminosity is gone, the high-pitched whining noise is gone, and at that point the creatures turn around, start walking back towards the woods along the fence line. The guy grabs his .30-06, loads live ammo into it, and begins firing into the creatures. And that guy always said to me, he said, I'll never forget how that biggest creature kept staring at me as I'm pumping live ammo into my .30-06 with no effect on it whatsoever. They ran back to the truck, went to the farmhouse, told the family what happened, took them to a neighbor's, and called the state police. When the troop arrived 45 minutes later, they went up into the field in the troop car looking for evidence, and the trooper told me the area where the object was on the ground was self-luminescent and glowing, about 100 feet or more in diameter. He said if he had a newspaper, he could have read the newspaper from the light coming off the glowing area. He said the farm animals wouldn't go anywhere near it. And that's the short part of the story. I can tell you, when they finally went back to the barracks, both the trooper and the witness were separately being interviewed. Then they called me to send my team up. And it got weirder and weirder during the night when my team got into the area and what happened during the night. It was the case that convinced me and my team that there was a lot more to the Bigfoot phenomena than just an unknown animal explanation. Right. And then it got even weirder and weirder because I began to question back then and even today, Bigfoot is an unknown primate, an unknown animal. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of people who've seen Bigfoot, even in recent weeks. And these sightings go on all over Pennsylvania year after year. They go on all over the country. Something similar seen all around the world. And they've been going back. These sightings go back to at least the Native American legends. They've been around for a long time. And why do we have no bodies by now? It makes absolutely no sense when you really look at all the data that's out there. Yeah. And then we had some cases that were even weirder, which gave us some clues as to why there may not be any body.
There's been a lot of talk recently in the community about Bigfoot and dogmen and some of these cryptids being, and I hate saying this, the pets of aliens. However, and I have yet to find this information to be totally valid, but I have seen some photographs of dogmen in the woods with what clearly looks like an alien on its shoulder, or like it's literally riding this creature, and there's movement of the eyes. It kind of reminded me of Kazoo from I don't know if you watched the Flintstones, but it wasn't green. It looked like that kind of shaped creature, an alien, and it was on a dogman. Now, I don't know, or I don't believe that these creatures are actually the pets of aliens, but I can see them being connected to a species or a race of aliens that, from other planets, and maybe they are here. But I would have loved to have been there, going out to that barn.
Yeah, other planets or, other dimensions. We don't have to think really outside the box here on this. This could be something that's extremely natural. It's just not natural to our particular dimension.
Well, I said years and years ago that there's more than one origin for the unknown category of UFOs. And I think many of us were very much for years and years into that most of the stuff is extraterrestrial. But I can tell you, over the years, I've been doing this now 58 years, and I've never seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself, surprising to most people, but I've interviewed thousands of witnesses, seen a lot of evidence. I'm more and more convinced that, for a lack of a better term, we're dealing with something that's interdimensional or something along that line. We don't understand the science. We may be using the wrong term. But I was going to tell you about that energy connection. I believe it plays a big part in this. What I saw years ago with many cases was that level, very close up UFO sightings and many encounters with Bigfoot and other cryptids, such as the giant thunderbirds, the giant bird sightings, black panthers, all kind of other weird entity reports. They commonly occur in the vicinity of energy sources. So they occur around high-tension power lines, power plants, gas lines, gas wells, radio towers, railroad tracks, reservoirs,
ley lines.
Goes on and on. Pardon me?
Ley lines.
Any, right, and they go on all over. Like in Pennsylvania, it's very common from a lot of investigators I talk to around the country as well. I believe there's an energy connection to it. It seems as though, under certain conditions, that certain types of UFOs and various types of cryptids seem to come into our physical reality. They can look physically solid, but in some cases they may not look completely solid, as I have many cases like that. There's other strange aspects to Bigfoot and other cryptids a lot of people are not aware of, or would rather pretend they don't know about it.
Yes.
And sometimes they leave evidence, and then they're gone. They come and they go. They're here and they're gone. And along the Chestnut Ridge is one of those areas where you get so many significant weird reports. Is there something up there we just don't know about? People have told me very weird stories of vortexes and seeing doorways and doors opening in the side of the ridge over the years, all kind of weird stuff. And I hear this more and more from so many people. I do not have the answers, and I'm not suggesting that Bigfoot is an alien from outer space raiding around in a spaceship, because we don't know even for sure what the UFOs are. What if we're dealing with a phenomena that's energy-related but can take on almost any form it wants to? Right. There's so much more to this than people realize or know about. I mean, I have a whole new program I do on Bigfoot right now called Strange Aspects of the Elusive Bigfoot, and I get into many, many weird parts of Bigfoot of the case that a lot of people don't know about.
We did an investigation where we went to a place in New York. It was they had a nuclear accident there. They were granted nuclear permission by the U.S. government to work with weapons-grade material. And they had an accident. The government said they cleaned up the lake, but you know how the government operates. Well, we had an account there. We did an investigation. And then that night when you were just talking about this, I was reliving this whole investigation. We experienced Bigfoot. We experienced a tremendous amount of pressure and tension in the air when the Bigfoot was there. We had full spectrum. We had infrared. We had any type of source and video recording you can do. We could not find this thing. And I never thought about interdimensional abilities with Bigfoot until that night, because this creature moved literally from right next to us, no more than 20 feet from us, to about a half a mile away in under a second. And the only way I can think of that is if maybe they could open up a portal and actually boom, like that. After that incident, on the way to the next investigation, we had an orange glowing UFO object that flew no more than 40 feet above our heads and was there for a while. I have video of that as well. And the correlation between UFOs and Bigfoot or cryptids, I think there is something there to portals opening up, or the ability that maybe they resonate or vibrate at a certain energy frequency that will open up these gates and allow these cryptids to come back and forth. So that could be the connection there.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I started writing about this back in the 70s, and I was in touch with researchers all over the country and around the world. And I found out that I was one of the first writing about these weird anomalies with Bigfoot, but found out that many other researchers throughout the world were having the same kind of reports, but they were reluctant to publish it because they didn't want to be laughed at by their peers. And a lot of witnesses are really they're reluctant enough to tell you about seeing the creature.
Yeah.
But when they bring up some of the weird aspects of things that they encountered, they're very reluctant to talk about it, which gives it more credibility. But in more recent years, I'm seeing a big change from many in the Bigfoot community. More and more beginning to ask the same questions I have, and they're beginning to look into the fact that there may be more to Bigfoot than the flesh and blood animal. And again, in more recent years, more and more Bigfoot research investigators are going out to areas which has a history of Bigfoot encounters, and they're not seeing Bigfoot, but they're encountering strange lights in the woods, some coming very close to them. And one thing they're talking about, even this year, especially up in Fayette County, other areas, and I wrote about these back in the 70s, they're talking about these strange firefly-like lights, but they're not fireflies, apparently. They act much different than a firefly, but they also illuminate the area around the object of the firefly. It's not just a flash like you see on your typical little fireflies. They illuminate the surrounding area.
Yep.
And I'm getting more and more reports on that. But if you like, I'll tell you about the case that convinced me that there's more to Bigfoot than a flesh and blood explanation.
Oh, 100%. One of the things that we encountered is we've been hearing a lot of reports with Bigfoots and cryptids of atypical wisps, blue lighted fairies or red or glowing fairies, and it's bright. It's like, it's very noticeable. But I definitely want to hear that convincing one that you just keep going.
Okay, so going back to the 73, 74 Bigfoot wave, and this is just the example of some of the reports, but this was the case that was very well documented. It was February 6, 1974, up way deep in the mountains up near Ohiopyle, back up in Fayette County again, not along the ridge.
Yeah, this is not too far, just to point out to our listeners that aren't familiar with this particular area. This is very near where Falling Water, the house built by Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah, up in that general area.
Yeah.
And this time period, some of your listeners will probably remember, because there was a big national trucker strike at the time. There was gas rationing going on in the country. There was a lot of violence on the highways. In Pennsylvania, the state police and the National Guard were patrolling together. They both responded to this incident. I couldn't get up the next morning. I couldn't get gas down here. Woman that the story focuses on had lived in the mountains all her life. She knew animals very well, was a very good shot, pretty much not afraid of anything. She's deep in the mountain in a little cabin home, and she's sitting there watching TV as normal in the evening. And she hears this commotion on her little front porch of her cabin home, and she had some pop cans out there. Something was knocking the pop cans around. So I think it was a few weeks before, she had a pack of wild dogs that came through the area, and she thought the dogs probably were back. So she thought, you know what, I'll grab my shotgun, and I'll just shoot over their head and scare the dogs away. So she grabs her shotgun, loads one chamber, and she walks over to the switch on the wall to turn on the porch light, and she walks over and to the front door and opens up the door, and she steps out. She's looking for dogs. There's no dogs there, but only right in front of her, 2-3 feet away, here's this huge, hairy Bigfoot creature with its arms straight up over its head. And the many times I interviewed her, she never ever once called it a Bigfoot. She said, it looked like a great big hairy ape, she said to me. So what does she do? She fires right into it with her shotgun. She said there's this bright burst of light, a big flash of light, like the flash on a camera, and this creature physically disappeared right in front of her.
Wow.
It was gone. Now, her in-laws lived 100 feet away. They heard the gunshot. The son-in-law grabs his pistol, starts walking up the dark road. He sees a figure running up the road ahead of him. He gets up closer, and he said he's surrounded by 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire. He starts shooting at them, runs into the cabin, and about the same time, there's this large object, they said, with a lighted object like a big Christmas ornament hovering over the woods at the same time. That's when they called the state police. Now, like I said, the state police and the National Guard both responded to the incident. By the time they found this place deep in the mountains, whatever there was gone. But I talked to the primary state police investigator, and he said, I don't know what happened up there. It was something very weird. And he based that on the reactions of the people, how upset they were, and the animal reactions. And I have seen that. And that's something you cannot fabricate. People can be fooled, animals can't. Yep. Very typically, now when the dogs, when a Bigfoot's in the distance, the dogs go crazy. But when they're at very close range, very commonly, even the most ferocious dogs won't bark, they won't move, they cower, they hide. Sometimes their eyes will move around, they won't make a sound. Sometimes they won't even eat right for 2 or 3 days later. You can't fabricate that. And also it's been seen, for example, with horses and cattle and cats, and even we've had reports of young babies in homes being extremely upset in the homes, like they've never been upset before when that thing was around their housing. That's something that was very intriguing. I remember the trooper told me these people had several dogs. They wouldn't make a sound when they arrived on the scene. And one of them, I think, was the Eskimo Spitz. It was a side of a cage, and the cop reached in and tried to pull the dog out. The dog wouldn't even move. The dog should have ripped his arm off. Now, the next morning when I got there, early the next morning, all the dogs welcomed us. They all barking very loud. Everything was back to normal. That was the case, among others, that suggested that they were dealing with something that's more than flesh and blood. There's something else involved.
Yeah, you know, I love hearing about she's 2 feet away and there's a light, and that's so intriguing. One of the things I did notice, and through my investigation, it was the fact that there seems to be a connection, and I've been exploring this big time now. I've been with infrasound and Bigfoots and these cryptids. They just seem to have an ability to not only project their infrasound and scare you and get on that nerve. That's why I think the dogs are reacting the way they're reacting, because they're putting it out there in advance of them coming, saying, listen, I'm coming through and I'm big. But I also think they use it as a cloaking device, where if you look at some of the photos you get of these cryptid and creatures, unless they're aware of it, that there's a presence there, 99% of the time you're going to get a photograph that is blurry, and it's always out of focus a little bit. However, the recent Eagle Cam I think they used out in the Pacific Northwest, where this creature was videotaped from a couple hundred feet up in the air, this creature did not know that it was under a watch, so it had no reason to cloak itself. So that's why you're getting a clearer image. But I think infrasound plays a big part in this, and fantastic. Fantastic research, amazing stuff. Stan, we're almost getting to that time where we're going to have to go. So where can our goblin friends actually find more of your stuff and contact you if they have anything they want to add to your investigations?
Okay. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to even talk about some of the really weird things that happened in recent weeks around here, but they can get on our website, www.stangordon.info. My books are available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com are on my website, and I'll be up at Fort Ligonier Days down here. It's a big event. I'll be there all weekend up there at the Second Chapter Books on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. They can go to my website for upcoming events as well, and there's a lot of things being planned for next year. And they can email me at paufo@comcast.net.
That's perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you're in the area, please make a point to see Stan. When is the next time you're going to be presenting a lecture?
Actually, I'm starting to slow down to the end of the year. Finally, we got to the end of the year. There's a lot of things are being scheduled for next year. I will actually be October 23rd. I'll be speaking for UPMC's Vanadium Woods Village. That's in Bridgeville, PA, from 2:30 to 4. It's free. It's open to the public. And then I will not be speaking at, but I'll be at the Pennsylvania MUFON Conference at Greensburg on November 4th. And I'll also be speaking at the Balser-Meyer Historical Society on November 19th in Greensburg at 2 p.m. They can go to my website and get some updates.
I'll tell you what, and if you're interested in come seeing Stan at the MUFON event, it could be a 2-for-1 deal because I'll be there as well, too.
There you go.
That's great.
Yep. So that's good. Stan, again, man, you are the reason I am in the business. I thank you so much for being there, making me interested as a child, and allowing me to still be in your presence from time to time. Our little goblins, I'm sure, will absolutely love this program, and we hope to have you on in the very, very near future.
All right. Well, appreciate it very much. It's always been fun working with you and a lot of the other researchers around the area, and thanks for having me on the program.
Hey, Stan, we'll talk to you very soon.
Absolute pleasure.
Yep. And from my good friend Bryan Bowden and me, Ronald Murphy, we are going to sign out here on another week of Inside the Goblin Universe. Until next time, friends, keep searching.
On Vampires, the latest book from Ronald Murphy. Join cryptozoologist and folklorist Ronald Murphy as he journeys through history in his quest to uncover the impetus for the archetype of the vampire. Begin at the lair of cannibals and travel throughout the dawn of history, exploring images and involving ideas of the vampire. Trace these concepts all the way to the information age. Keep a stake close by. You're going to need it. On Vampires is now available at Amazon.com.